In this video, we're going to take a look at activity 3.1.5, variables and functions, using the VEX v5 testbed and VEX Code v5. With this, we are going to modify the program from 2A so that we're going to write a variable that determines what is the brightest light that the optical sensor detects. The limit switch is going to reset the record and start with the sensor covered, slowly uncovered in different ways with different objects, or shine other light sources on it as you kind of work with it. So that's probably one of the best ways to go through and to kind of look at this, is just by covering it up with different objects and things like that. So I'm actually going to cover it here. I can use my phone to kind of cover the optical sensor. What's going to happen is, as we go into VEX Code, one thing that we can kind of tell is if I go into devices before I get writing my program, I'm going to go with the optical sensor and see I'm getting 0 there, and as I uncover it I get to 66. So really this tells me that my variable, I'm going to start off with 0, and we want to see what's the brightest light that the optical sensor detects. So that's really kind of what's happening as we go forward. Let me go ahead and decrease the size on this program, and we're going to use a lot of the program that we have going on here. Alright, so I can go ahead and go back, take us back to the main menu screen on the brain. And what we're going to do is, under make a variable, I'm going to go ahead and say make a variable, and we're going to go ahead and choose to create the brightest and hit submit. Now once I have this set, I'm going to go ahead and go to File, Save As, and before I make any changes, I'm going to set this as Part 2B and hit Save. So now Part 2A is left alone. It may have that closest variable in it, but it doesn't have any of the changes set yet. So now let's go up here, and we're going to go ahead and say Part 2, or set the closest to brightest, and I'm going to start off with setting it to 0, because it looks like the more light that that optical sensor gets, the higher the numbers go. So what we're going to do is we're going to print what is the brightest value on the brain. We're going to set it on row 1, column 5. Set the font to super large. We're going to print, now instead of the distance, under sensing, we want to see what is the, in the optical section, what is its, hue in degrees. So, and that's probably the best case to use in this scenario. You can use that, or you can use brightness in percent and see what kind of brightness that we get as we do that. And so that's going to be some of the options we can have as far as what we're doing with our optical sensor. Alright, so as we go down, the limit switch is going to set the record, which is fine. We're going to clear row 2. We're going to set the cursor there. We're then going to print the brightest variable on the brain. And then here we're going to, I'm going to just go ahead and duplicate the optical 2. We're going to print whatever the brightness is in percent, and then the same kind of thing. I can go ahead and duplicate this. I'll drop that in, and then same kind of thing, duplicate and drop that into where we see those. So these get kind of thrown out. I can go ahead, they're kind of behind some of the blocks, so I can go ahead and get rid of some of them. I can see this one here. Alright, and we're going to set it to the brightest. We may need to change the operator, because we want to say that it's, if it's greater than the biggest, but let's put our optical in there, or brightest I should say, and I can go ahead and get there. Alright, so again, reviewing the code, brightest is set to 0. We're going to print the brightest value as the start, and then we're going to print what the brightness is in percent, and then we're going to go ahead and, while the limit switch is not pressed on row 2, we're going to go ahead and print the brightest value, and it's going to, since it's in the loop, it's going to constantly be updating. And then it's also going to do the same thing for the optical, and if the optical is greater than the brightest, then they're going to set the brightest equal to what the optical sensor is reading. So let's go ahead and hit download. Let's hit run. So right now 0 is what we're reading at, and if I take my phone away, So I shouldn't go through and see what I've got. So if I turn on my light above, for example, I can see this goes to 64, and then that's the brightest that it remembers. So this is the variable that it's recording. This is what the sensor is reading. So if I turn that light back on, you'll see these will show 64 and 64. This is what the sensor is reading from that particular light source. Okay, so if I go through and shine a light on it, then you can see as I get closer to it, it gets up to 100%. And I can go through and see what percentage or what brightness value that I have. So that brightness can be remembered based upon the variable that we set up. And again, if we were to go through, and I'm going to stop the program and hit run again. So I'm going to go ahead and cover this sensor. If I hold the limit switch, and even though if I turn on this light, the limit switch does not allow for those numbers to be recorded. So then once I turn on the light, and if I let go of the limit switch, you're going to see it's going to go through and get a value as it gets started. So if I turn that off, turn that back on, there's a even brighter light setting, and we're able to see what was the brightest one it read and what kind of reading it's at. So probably that initial flash probably threw out just a little bit more light to where we got 91, and right now once it's stabilized, it's reading at about 88 or 89 as it keeps flashing, kind of moving back and forth there. So this will go through and finish out activity 3.1.5. This is part 2B, and how to remember what's the brightest value that the optical sensor reads at with VEX code V5.